First things first, I'ma say all the words inside my head. I'm fired up and tired of the way that things have been. Oh, ooh, the way that things have been. Oh, ooh. I was broken from a young age, taking my soak into the masses, writing my poems for the few that look at me, took to me, shook at me, feeling me, singing from heartache, from the pain, taking my message from the veins, speaking my lesson from the brain, seeing the beauty through the. Hey, you made me a believer, believer. Hey, my love, my God, it came from. Hey, you made me a believer, believer.
Hello, good morning everyone. Hello and welcome to the third day of Made in Steel. As it was announced today, it's everything in English. So if you need a translation, you can use through the app, there is a simultaneous translation. Comunque ringrazio tutti quanti per essere qua in italiano e vi do il benvenuto al terzo giorno di Made in Steel. So this morning we're actually focusing on one of the topics that has been at the center of our business for the last 15 years. 10 years, definitely a lot more during the last year, which is decarbonization. But at the same time, we come to this moment to discuss what is the future for steel, and especially if steel is continuing the path to become decarbonized, green, net zero, however you want to call it. We come to discuss it in a moment when the world is definitely changing very rapidly. Even some paradigms of the net zero goals that the European Commission and other parts of the world have set are being put in question. So I think it's a very good moment to discuss with our experts and with operators from the industry where we are and if some of the strategies are changing or if the strategies are actually continuing ahead despite the noise that it's made by the political announcement continuously. So first of all, you have seen the program in the program of this morning. So we will start with two presentations, then we will have a round table with Italian and international speakers, and then we will move to a final presentation by Eurometal with the new president, Alexander Giulio. So first of all, I would like to invite with me on the podium Professor Carlo Mapelli, who's a professor at the Politecnico in Milano, so local here with us, one of the universities that is high on the list internationally that makes this city and this country very proud. And Professor Mapelli will give us an introduction of the future of steelmaking, new technologies, and the best available decarbonization solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emanuele, for your kind presentation and introduction. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to be here. And in my presentation, I will deal with the decarbonization issue that is mandatory to be faced not only from an environmental point of view, but also from an economic one in the context of regulation that has been imposed by European Union. In a correct perspective, the idea of decarbonization and of green steel must be associated with the elimination of dangerous pollutant agents, but these aspects have been monitored and controlled by the public authorities several years ago. And thus, nowadays, the attention of regulators and stakeholders is mainly focused on reduction of the climate-altering gas. Climate-altering gas aren't pollutant, but they can cause some alteration in terms of increase of temperature and heating of the atmosphere. The increase of greenhouse gas emission, and more specifically of CO2, are featured by worrying projection, and steelmaking sector is one of the ones considered as hard to abate. This is some figures about the emission, and steelmaking and iron making are one of the main producers of this gas nowadays. And you can observe also this scenario that points out a very dangerous scenario by the end of the century, especially as an increase of the heat at the northern and southern pole that resembles an average increase that is 6 Celsius degrees. We don't know if this is caused by the anthropic and the human activity. We don't know it. We are certain that the atmosphere is heating, and one of the few leverage we have at our disposal to decrease this danger is to decrease CO2, because it's proved that CO2 is one of the climate altering gas. This is certain. We don't know if the introduction in the atmosphere, and we don't know if it is proved, but this is the scenario. Anyway, in order to face such a dramatic scenario of climate change, the European Union has imposed ETS and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And this mechanism aims at avoiding the discrimination of European companies that have to pay the permission for emitting the CO2 that in most foreign countries are not applied. The mechanism has been designed to decrease the greenhouse gas emission and to discourage the transfer of industrial activities abroad. Such a mechanism will be applied not just to iron-making and steel-making activity, but also to cement, aluminium, fertilizer, electricity, and hydrogen production. The mechanism has been designed to be compliant with the rules of the World Trading Organization, and it imposes that a European importer of a good has to register its importation of cement, iron, steel, fertilizer, etc. And the price of this emission is fixed by ETS. Nowadays, ETS is in a range between 65 and 82 euros. It depends. Nowadays, today, we are at 65 after the threatening by President Trump. And the emission of CO2 can be distinguished in three main categories. Scope 1, that are the direct emission from the industrial plant. Scope 2, that is associated with the generation of energy. And Scope 3, that is emission involved in extraction of raw materials and the logistic chain of the raw material. The steel-making activities nowadays are performed mainly by two technological routes, and these are the two main technological routes. The first one is the so-called integrated technological routes based on blast furnace and basic oxygen furnace, and is focused on the production of steel starting from iron ores. And in these technological routes, the emission of CO2 is huge because it is 2.5 tons of CO2 for each ton of steel that is produced. So we produce much more CO2 than steel. And in this case, the advantage of this technological route is that it is completely autonomous from an energy point of view. It isn't just autonomous, it is also an exporter of electricity to the country. And this is based on the handling and treatment of fossil coal. The second route is based on recycling, mainly on recycling, and it is associated with electric arc furnace that loads the scrap, and in some cases this scrap is also associated with DRI, direct reduced iron, and to produce steel by this technique. This technique has an impact in terms of CO2 emission that is lower because it is just 150, 200 kilogram per CO2 for each steel that is ton of steel that is produced. Unfortunately, this is associated with the availability of scrap. And this route is mainly present in, not mainly present, but worldwide covers 35% of the production of steel, but with some exception. Italy is one of the exceptions. In Italy, 82% of the steel that is produced by electric arc furnace. And other countries has the same production matrix, for example, Turkey, Spain, and United States. But this is associated with the availability of scrap, the possibility to apply such a mechanism. And some producers, for example, in Italy, have certified their production by labels because the production by electric arc furnace implies a lower amount of the greenhouse gas emission. And this is an example by Arvedi. And this mechanism is made more efficient also by the elimination of reheating furnace. Because in the Arvedi process, the production of steel isn't just based on the electric arc furnace, but on a system where after the continuous casting of the steel, the slab isn't cooled down, but is maintained at a high temperature and directly rolled, and this avoids the consumption of natural gas in the reheating furnace. And this is one of the techniques that can be used to decrease the carbon footprint featuring a steel. But an issue is still open for the route based on the electric arc furnace, and is the availability of raw materials to feed this technological route. And in order to decrease the CO2 emission, we can follow mainly 4 perspectives: the carbon capture and the usage of the captured CO2, the use of hydrogen, the electrification, complete electrification of the process, and the exploitation of biomass. Carbon capture, use, and storage is associated with devices that can capture the CO2 that is produced in the steelmaking plant, and then we can store it in empty wells underground, or to use it. The possibility to use CO2 as a raw material is difficult because it involves a huge amount of energy, because the molecule of CO2 is one of the most stable in nature. The possibility to capture is a nice possibility, but is limited by the concentration of CO2 in the stream gas. There is some discussion. CO2 capture is or isn't an experimental plant or device. The answer is that carbon capture is a reliable technique, but it needs a pure stream of CO2, or nearly pure stream of CO2, because if we mix CO2 with other gases, we have to spend a lot of energy in terms of compression. And the cost to store underground is between 50 and 65 euro per ton of CO2. A second possibility is hydrogen. And hydrogen should be used in shaft furnace, and this used even nowadays in furnace, because even when we use natural gas in the shaft furnace to produce the DRI, we use 66% of hydrogen in the furnace. And these are some reactions, and these are the expected projects for the exploitation of DRI plants in Europe. These are a lot of expected new plants. In this case, the bottleneck of the process isn't the availability of natural gas or of hydrogen, as could be expected, is the possibility that we can supply the iron ore featured by the correct quality, because the iron ores used for DRI plant isn't the same quality used for blast furnace. And nowadays, just 4-5% of the iron ores extracted worldwide is compliant with the use in this plant. And one of the most important fuel and reducing agent is so-called green hydrogen, that is supported and by some public fund, and is based on the extraction of hydrogen by splitting the water molecule of fresh water. You cannot use salt water, seawater in this process, otherwise you destroy the electrolyzer. And there are some drawbacks in the so-called green hydrogen. It isn't so green as we think, because the amount of energy to produce 1 cubic meter of hydrogen is 5 kilowatt hours, and we need more than 600 cubic meter of hydrogen to produce just 1 ton of DRI. And we consume fresh water, that is a rare resource for agriculture, and is becoming more critical. One of the most interesting perspectives to use hydrogen is the use of the so-called turquoise hydrogen, not the green hydrogen, that is based on the exploitation of methane and the splitting of the methane molecule can produce hydrogen and can produce solid carbon. So we capture the carbon before the use of the gas. And the advantage is that the consumption of energy is lower than the one used to split the water molecule, and we don't consume fresh water. But we need regasifier in case of Italy, or availability of natural gas to perform such a process. Electrification, complete electrification. And electricity is a nice perspective, but for example, there are 2 companies from USA that are promoting this technique. One is supported by Nucor. You solve iron oxide in a solution, and then through electrical energy, you split iron from oxygen. It's nice, it's smart, but nowadays we don't know which is the solvent to solve iron oxide, and we don't know how much electrical energy we need. So it's difficult to estimate this process. And Boston Metals, that was supported by Bill Gates 10 years ago, uses a technique that is similar to the process used for the extraction of aluminum. It's a smelter at high temperature, and there is a pilot plant. We know how much electrical energy we need to perform this operation, and we need 4 megawatt hour per ton of steel. 4 megawatt hour per ton of steel is a huge intensity in electricity, and so the problem is shifted to the electricity production, because the most of the electricity production, especially in India or in China, is based again on coal, and so there are some problems. And to answer to this question, there is some idea to use nuclear or small modular reactor, and in newspaper and so on, this perspective is mentioned. But if we observe the historical trend for energy generation, electrical energy generation, just one of the electrical source is losing position, and this nuclear. nuclear plants. And what's the reason? It isn't a problem, a trouble about the safety of a nuclear plant. The reason is of another nature. The nuclear energy source isn't competitive from an economic point of view. And it isn't profitable. So the companies involved in generation of electricity doesn't want to invest in this kind of plant. And for renewable energy, for example, from wind, from a photovoltaic plant, is an important source, but in order to make it available and reliable, we need to invest in storage, because we have to maintain the correct balance between the production and the consumption of electricity. Otherwise, the problem affecting recently Portugal and Spain can become more frequent. And finally, exploitation of biomass. Biomass, and especially the use of wastes from agriculture or agri-food industry, is a nice perspective. And if you produce a CO2 from agricultural wastes or a rotation of forestry and woods, the CO2 isn't counted as an emission of CO2, because the regulation accept and consider which is the metabolic phenomena in the nature. Because if you exploit biomass from agricultural wastes and crops, seasonally the ecosystem can capture again this quantity of CO2 for each regeneration. And this is, for example, one of the processes that exploits biomass. And you combine in briquettes iron oxide, biochar, and a little quantity of binder. And from iron oxide, you can produce a sponge iron that can be loaded in the electric arc furnace. And if you use such a system, the amount of CO2 is quite pure. And so you can also capture this emission. And this is a great advantage, because if you use biochar or biomass, for the regulation, the emission is considered neutral. If you capture, you go into negative emission. And so the public authorities pays you because you are capturing. You haven't to pay ETS, but you have a form of support. And okay, this is an example of the sponge iron that is produced after this process, and this is the biochar. The setup of a route that can exploit the biochar could be a challenge for the new years, and Italy or Spain in this case are in good position, because our economies are featured by a large amount of agricultural wastes. And this project isn't utopic, because Marcegaglia in Ravenna has invested in this project and won an innovation fund called, so the European Commission is funding the project for a smelting process based on the exploitation of biomass in Ravenna, and to store the CO2 that is emitted from the plant in Ravenna in the wells in Ravenna. Okay, this is a synthetic perspective, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Mapelli. Thank you very much for this interesting introduction. We've talked a lot about technology, about what the steel industry can do, which aspects of the technological side can be implemented in our steel plants and in the production of steel. Before we turn to the round table, I would like to invite here on the stage Lorenzo Mottura from Edison. Professor Mappelli talked about energy, and we would like to hear from one of the large suppliers of energy in Italy, what is their view and what they are doing with the industry of steel, but also with other industries, to working with the industrial production to decarbonize and get to the levels that we want to be at. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a pleasure to be here today and to start this event. We are living in a particularly complex period, characterized by unstable geopolitical context, ongoing war and trade conflicts, and in parallel, we are trying to pursue the energy transition, a challenging path of transformation towards a more sustainable future. Energy transition is a right to win, and it remains so despite the geopolitical changes taking place. But energy transition must become instrument for competitiveness, and not only a need to be answered for environmental sustainability. Energy transition is a major challenge that must be embraced and transformed into an opportunity for Europe and for Italy. We have to work together and create synergies among institutions, associations, industry, territories, and energy operators to effectively address this challenge. This requires collaboration and proactive attitude by all the involved parties. We cannot just wait for things to come and for others to trace the path. It is important to search for and create synergies at European level, to develop a resilient competitiveness against the trade pressure from external geopolitical areas, building on complementarities to create scale and going beyond the infra-European competition, quoting Mario Draghi. Energy transition is not a universal recipe. It has to be adapted to each sector and to each specific geographical area, each with its own needs, to ensure competitiveness, to get along with sustainability. This requires mixing different technologies case by case. Technologies that in some cases are ready and in others that will be ready in the medium-long term. We are therefore facing a transformation that will take place in stages, leveraging on progressive availability of different technologies. Now we have heard the several technologies explained by Professor Mappelli. Let me briefly mention what we are experiencing to be the most relevant technologies and what we see the most promising technologies in the future. So today, the combination of energy efficiency, electrification, and renewable energy is a lever that we are in the condition to deploy immediately. Photovoltaic is a mature technology that, as part of a balanced mix, allows to reduce electricity prices. Moreover, the use of PPAs, both on-site and off-site, is an effective solution to facilitate the diffusion of PVs by freeing companies from the weight of the initial investment. Nevertheless, in Italy, there are few points of attention to be addressed in order to reach the same effectiveness in deploying PVs experienced in other countries. Land cost, authorization timing, connection timing and costs. These costs may represent more than 20% of the renewable cost for the final users. Second, also the wood biomass, which we have recently heard, from short supply chains, represent a valuable tool to contribute as of today to the decarbonation path. Its potential in Italy is such that wood biomasses may substitute up to 6 to 8% of the current natural gas demand used for heat production. Then there are in the mid-term technologies such as biomethane and CCS, which we heard before, but the two of them are featuring different degrees of evolution. While CCS is a technology that still needs to be industrialized, biomethane does not. Nevertheless, biomethane is not easy to be managed, and the issue is how to scale it up to reach the 6 billion cubic meters target that has been envisaged in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which is equal to about 10% of the natural gas demand by 2030. Biomethane is characterized by two different feedstock supplies. The first uses the humid fraction of the urban organic waste, simply FORSU in Italian. To scale the biomethane production from FORSU, it is essential to work both on the local acceptability, addressing the pushback from local communities, even in those regions that are net FORSU exporters, and in its economical equation, making it worth to invest in this technology. This means the level of incentives. The second uses agricultural waste as feedstock. In this case, to scale up biomethane production, it is essential that feedstock intermediaries able to aggregate agricultural waste by type and by area are developed. And this is essential to close the dimensional gap between the small farmers and the large energy producers, the latter being too big to effectively manage relationship and risk associated to farmers. Finally, there are technologies that will contribute to energy transition in the more long run. Hydrogen production from renewables being one of these, and nuclear power through small modular reactors being another. The nuclear power plants have the potential to operate in cogeneration mode, the small modular reactor, and this makes a big difference compared to the large plants. By working in cogeneration mode, it is possible to produce not only electricity, but also providing direct heat, district heating, and hydrogen. And this hydrogen is produced with 25 to 30% less energy need than starting from the electrolysis of water, because it can start from the electrolysis of steam, to the benefit of the hard-to-abate industries and local communities. While the Italian hydrogen strategy has been envisaged, the consensus of the contribution of new nuclear that the new nuclear may give to the energy transition is progressively growing in Italy. And the delegation law has recently been presented by the government to the Italian Parliament for the development of the new regulation to enable the nuclear option in our country. It is key for Italy to work proactively on both green hydrogen and SMRs, not only to deploy them when ready, but also to play an active role in the development of these technologies, both from, let's say, a technology point of view in the framework of European cooperation. Being part of the development of these technologies allows to foster the Italian economic growth and the employment rate, while benefiting from scale and know-how that is shared today among the European countries. Let me highlight some concrete examples of activities performed by Edison and mostly by Edison and Next, who is the company of the Edison Group who works to get along in the transformation path with B2B and B2C customers. So we said that the energy transition is a path, a journey that must take place in stages. The project that we have built together with Michelin Italia is a clear example of this approach. Our The carbonation path alongside Michelin Italia started in 2021 in the tire plant of Cuneo, Michelin's largest production site in Western Europe. We have substituted a former gas-fired cogeneration with a high-efficiency trigeneration plant integrated with an existing photovoltaic plant and supplemented by 2 biomasses steam boilers, all to provide electricity, steam, and water for heating and cooling of the tire production plant. This project is a major step of the decarbonation. Thanks to this new mix of plants, inaugurated last December, the Cuneo plant is already close to the objective that have been set by the Michelin Group for 2030. Namely, these targets are halving CO2 emissions and reducing energy consumption by 37%. And already today, thanks to the new plants, the Cuneo plant has reduced by 47% the CO2 emission and 30% the consumption. So a big step in the path. We talked about the importance of photovoltaic and in particular of PPA model as a solution that can play an important role in building the path to net zero. We have signed several PPAs, but the one with Acciaierie Venete is worth to be mentioned. The PPA has been signed last January and is related to the development of an off-site PV plant. It will produce 10 gigawatt-hour per year of electricity to meet part of the need of the energy need of Acciaierie Venete plants located in the northeast. And thanks also to this new photovoltaic plant, Acciaierie Venete has been able to benefit from the Italian energy release incentive mechanism. Talking about hydrogen, we are supporting Iris Ceramica Group in the development of an H2 factory in Castellarano to supply hydrogen-ready furnace with a 50-50 green hydrogen and natural gas blending. And this will allow to significantly reduce the CO2 emissions associated with the ceramic production. During the test phase, a green hydrogen production pilot plant has been installed, and it is allowed to produce the world's first ceramic slab using hydrogen. We are also working on a more far-reaching projects with a large territorial extension, such as the Puglia Green Hydrogen Valley project, an initiative that envisages the construction of 2 green hydrogen production plants in Puglia for a total capacity of 160 megawatt. This is a project of national relevance, and it has been selected by the European Commission in the context of the IPCEI call for proposal for up to 370 million euros financing. The aim is twofold: accelerate the use of green hydrogen in the national energy mix and support the decarbonation of the Taranto steel plant. Finally, we have signed an MOU with Federacciai, Ansaldo Nucleare and EDF to identify possible sites in northern Italy for the development of SMR nuclear power plants to support the decarbonation of the electrical and thermal demand of the steel makers industrial districts on one hand, and on the other hand, to identify possible mechanisms to import nuclear energy produced in France in the interim period at the benefit of the decarbonation of the Italian steel makers. So different projects, different technologies, a tailor-made for solutions for different sectors, with one fundamental element in common: the commitment to work together with a pragmatic approach to make decarbonation an opportunity and to enhance competitiveness. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Lorenzo Mottura from Edison for highlighting and talking about what our energy partners can do in relationship to the industrial sector. Now I would like to get to the center of this debate, and I would like to call on the stage with me Mr. Carlo Beltrame from Gruppo Beltrame, Harsha Shetty from Jindal Shadid Iron and Vulcan Steel, Stéphane Tondeau from ArcelorMittal, Carlo Piemonte from Primetals, and Engineer Maurizio Fusato from Feralpi Group. A big round of applause and thank you for your time. So take a seat, you will have the microphones in front of you, so you can share it. I mean, we've heard a lot about what are the technologies and what energy can do to support the steel industry in the decarbonization transition. I mean, my role here is to ask questions and also be a little bit try to be controversial, so putting something on the table. I would like to show just one first slide to you, if it comes up. Regia. It's coming, yes. So the slide actually tells us, if you remember where we were 20 years ago, this man here, Mr. Al Gore, who was vice president and nearly elected president of the United States, won a Nobel Prize with an inconvenient truth when he started putting in the medias, of course, and talking about decarbonization. His role in talking about decarbonization was accepted as changed completely the scenario of the argument, of the conversation that we were having. So definitely a moment of change in this moment. But let's fast forward 20 years if we see the second slide. This is today, 2025. You also know this man, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, just a few weeks ago, published with his think tank an article called The Climate Paradox, Why We Need to Reset Action on Climate Change. This is not to say that we need to reset action, but it's for you that are on the panel to start from this point, actually. And I will ask, maybe I will start with Stéphane Tondeau from ArcelorMittal. I know it's, I want to create a little bit of buzz in the audience. I know we all, as you can see, CEDARWeb organizes Made in Steel and has a certification for being environmentally friendly and things like this. So we believe in the path to decarbonization. But the question I want to ask to start with Mr. Tondeau is, what is the current status? And I mean, are the plans of big groups like yours changing based on not only being competitive in the market, on one hand has always been the target, but on the other hand also the shifting political situation and also view on decarbonization?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me? It's fine.
Can you put higher the microphone?
Okay.
Yes.
So thanks first for the invite and the nice, interesting question and surprise. I think there is nothing contradictory in what you're showing. I think we all know that the climate change is an issue. There are more and more regions where even private households, but even companies cannot get insured anymore because there are floods where there were never floods before. There are droughts that can impact the soil. So we will all face a new context where climate is not an option. We are seeing that every day. So the point of Mr. Blair is really correct. Do we have the right speed? And we indeed see some regions which are slowing down, like the US. But let's be hopeful. After the first mandate of Mr. Trump, the things were accelerated, so could be accelerated again. USA will not escape from what's happening on the planet. So indeed, we need to speed up all efforts that we're doing. But what Mr. Blair mentioned is the right thing, is that if it's not economic, it will not happen. I think we are all customers, and we are all to make those choices. And this is leading me to the question you're asking, what is ArcelorMittal doing? And you have seen that in November last year, we have paused our plans for decarbonization. We have not stopped them, we have paused them. And the reason for that was very simple. We are technologically ready, we know what to do, we have several options, and we have seen a lot of them before. We are producing in several countries, especially in Europe, so different contexts, maybe different solutions. but there is one thing missing, it's the market itself. And when I say the market is, first question, is there still a market for steel production in Europe? That's a question we have to answer very, very clearly. You saw that the market has been reducing from 160 million ton to 130. Imports have been growing. So first question we have to ask us is this the place to produce? We are still convinced that it's the place to produce, but then it has to be economical. It has to be competitive, and it has to be in a fair market. This is why we paused our investments. We restarted the discussion with the public authorities to say, we want to be here, but make sure that there is a context for production in Europe. And meaning not just producing with overcost, because then we won't be able to sell the product. So clear the trade issues, and we have seen what happened with the safeguard and the fact that this concern was taken seriously, and the trade instruments. Carbon, we already have an issue. We have a cost that we pay even for exports. This hurts us. So make sure that there is a fair level playing field, and that if you impose a CBAM, which is a need, that the CBAM is working. The third thing is the electricity availability, cost, and CO2 impact. As we have seen before, going to electrify the processes, if the processes use an electricity which is high CO2 content, does not work. And finally, the markets. Today, I think we are discussing about green steel. Green steel, we are progressing. I think we will come to the figures very quickly, but it's still a very marginal market. So if the authorities do not push for use of green steel in all the steel-intensive segments, this will remain a niche market. And if this remains a niche market, no one will invest massively. Of course. So that's the main question. We want these points to be answered. But in the meantime, you know that we have our plant in Spain, in Sestao. This plant will double its capacity next year. So we will have 1.6 million ton of low-carbon steel, meaning even for the flats, fully recycled, with fully 75% steel recycled, 100% green electricity. And this year, we will reach the milestone of having 500,000 ton of X-Carb, meaning low-carbon certified products being sold on the market. So we are already ready. We have the widest product range, but we need the market to grow. And our plan that we will clear when we have the decision from the authorities, on the points I raised before, we are ready to act, but it will maybe be a bit slower than expected, because we need to be in line with the growth of the demand on the market. Yes. Otherwise, we put capacity which are then not profitable and then make no sense, very simply.
Thank you very much. And on this, I mean, you mentioned something very interesting. The opportunity to, first of all, we need to create a market to have a market, but also the opportunity of producing that green steel in Europe. I'm very happy to have here in Milan Mr. Harsha Shetty from the Jindal Group and the Vulcan Steel in Oman. And this is a question that I ask you. I mean, for those of you, maybe you can tell us very quickly what Jindal is doing, especially in Oman, where they have a greenfield project to produce green steel. But the question is also what you're doing. Is it viable, and effectively can economically make sense to import then semi-products and other products into Europe? So looking beyond Europe and seeing maybe a supply of green steel coming from beyond Europe into the market.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Harsha Shetty. I represent Jindal Steel Oman. In Oman, Jindal Steel is currently producing 3.2 million tons steel through the DRI, EAF, and natural gas route. And we are putting up a 5 million ton steel plant in Oman, which will be producing low carbon footprint steel. Now, before I get into the details, as you know, the steel industry is like a pyramid. 70% of the steel is produced using BF, BOF, around, and the rest is using EAF. And even in that, only 7% is using DRI, EAF, natural gas. So we belong to that 7%, which naturally has a very low carbon footprint. So our scope 2 emissions are 0.78 as against an average of 0.85 to 0.9. That's primarily because of the process. So when we look at the steel industry forward, so one is the base layer, the BF, BOF. Then next is, of course, EAF scrap and EAF and the DRI NG. And the top layer, which everyone of us aspires to be and which is the center of the discussion, is DRI, green hydrogen, and EAF. So that's like, you know, that's the aspiration. So first thing I feel is what is needed is a technology switch from BF to BOF into EAF. And we cannot depend fully on scrap because that's also limited. So what we will need is clean energy, and obviously that's why hydrogen comes into picture. We have a different strategy in addition to hydrogen. I'll explain that. So what we are doing in Duqm is that we are building a 5 million ton low carbon footprint steel, which will be using green energy because we are blessed with being in a region where sun intensity is amongst the top 5 in the world. 3,500 hours of sunlight in a year gives us adequate cost of economies in producing renewable power, solar power. So, and when you look at the decarbonization ranking for steel, so out of world average is around 2.3. So roughly around 25 to 30% decarbonation happens due to change in the technology from BF to EAF and natural gas. And another 40-45% happens because of green electricity. And then comes hydrogen, which is primarily in the DRI route. So what we are doing is we already done the energy switch. We have already invested in 100% green hydrogen ready DRI technology. So the DRI plant is already under construction. We have invested in the Energeron technology. And we have also in advanced talk, so probably the announcement would be within next 1 week with a national champion to produce renewable energy in Oman. So our strategy is attain decarbonization. 70% of the decarbonization should happen through renewable energy, and the rest will be through green hydrogen. Yes, currently the costs of green hydrogen are high, and we believe progressively it will go down. But from our side, what we are doing is we are going to be in the state of preparedness. We have chosen the technology. We have started building the plant. And we are going to, and we are located in one of the best solar potential regions in the world. So we are putting up the solar parks. And then since it's a green hydrogen ready technology, so when the hydrogen is cost effective, as per McKinsey and various, McKinsey, BCG and various research, the economical cost of hydrogen should be less than $1.5 per kg. So hence, we first will go the electrification route, that's the lowest cost, and then we will go for hydrogen.
So eventually you think you'll also be able to produce material that is competitive in markets such as Europe and the Middle East?
Well,
because then we will look at the premium prices, which is one of the big questions.
When we produce low carbon footprint or green steel, it's definitely at this stage cannot be the same cost of gray steel. Definitely, because you are going to make investments which need a payback and which need an ROI. So obviously it's going to be at a higher cost of capex and a higher cost of a higher operating cost. Now that has to be compensated by all of us, because I'll come to the premium part is, I'll just...
we can talk later on the premium part,
but that needs to be compensated by the consumers and partly by the government.
Of course, exactly.
Yes, because the industry alone cannot try to limit the global warming from 4 degrees to 1.5 degrees. Industry has its limitations. So it's a collective effort.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, this is the example of two international groups, but we have the blessing in a way. Of course, Oman has the blessing of the sun and a lot of energy, renewable energy. But in Italy, we are already in a good position for this decarbonization. You mentioned, Mr. Shetty, the first step is, of course, electrifying steel making. In Italy, 80% almost of our production is already electrified. So I would like to ask Carlo Beltrame first for their experience. Of course, the Beltrame Group is across Europe, not only in Italy, but what is the advantage that we have in the path, and also what does it mean for a group like yours to take this advantage of being already partly decarbonized starting from scrap, but also investing in what the other speakers were mentioning about green steel that needs to be recognized also by the client. You have a brand called Calibre, of course, so the need for the market to recognize decarbonized steel.
Thank you very much. I think that Calibre was the first voluntary label in Italy, and one of the first in Europe. Right now, weight 15% of our sales. Actually, I was preparing a very good answer about this question, but sincerely, I'm a little bit fed up. You know why? Every time, in the last 10 months, I participate to 10 or 12 panels. And all the time, we are talking about flat product, flat product, flat product, and flat product. How to decarbonize flat product? Guys, we are producing, not Beltrame, Italy is producing majority of long product, and is producing very well. 80% of Italy is producing long product, very well. We are already decarbonized. How much money receive electrical furnace for producing this to achieve a level of CO2 emission so low? From you, zero. How much money was allocated to blast furnace in Europe? Certainly, not drone. But how many billions was allocated? I think that we arrived to 14. 14. And for us, meaning electrical furnace producer, zero. Now everybody's focusing on, let's reduce scope 1. Let's reduce scope 1. Let's reduce scope 1 for what? We need a market. To need a market, we need to reduce non-scope 1. It's useless to hear saying that, I don't know, a big automotive industry put the photovoltaic on the roof. Their scope 1 is, I think, 5% on the total emission. Their emission is coming from scope 3. Let's create a market on this sense. Let's create the need to have, not just for them, also for us. Our 60% of CO2 is based on scope 3. So if we want to create the market, yes, we need absolutely to have from EU, from the local authorities, support, creating a sensibility on the public. And that's the reason why we are speaking here. But certainly we have to address correctly. If everybody keeps speaking on scope 1, we'll never go anywhere. And sorry, let's sometimes speak about electrical furnace and not just flat product from blast furnace.
Absolutely. This is why we accept the challenge, and also why we're talking about decarbonization here in a country where, as you know, 80% of the production is through scrap and EAF production. So also Feralpi Group we have on the panel, which is also a big Italian group and a big European group, looking again at long products, which is, it's true, a different challenge, because you start from being already partly decarbonized, but as Mr. Beltrame said, of course, the role of the public support in terms of investment on your path of decarbonization is lower for many reasons, also some that some do not agree with. But what is Feralpi Group doing, and what is the role of the public, and also taking in consideration, for example, Italy and Germany, where you are, if there are some also different challenges that you face?
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everyone. In Feralpi, we have 3 steel mills. We produce 2.5 million tons a year, 100% scrap-based and 100% EAF route. We decided not to stop, so we already had a good carbon footprint, of course, but we decided to try to go ahead, and so we set up a decarbonization plan. And so we invest a lot of money, entirely spent by our companies, in increasing the electrification. For example, we build 2 rolling mills without rating furnace. So we have the first 2 mills in rolling mill in Europe without any gas consumption, and so we pursue the route of electrifying our processes. This we think it's very important, and when you can electrify, you have to do it because you can produce or buy renewable energy much easier than substitute the, of course, fossil fuel. So we have reduced from 2022 to 2024 about 35% of our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emission with electrifying and producing and buying renewable energy. We think that this is a good result, and we had made a big increasement in avoiding this emission. The real problem for the future is to decarbonize also the Scope 1, the Scope 1 emission that is not possible to electrify, and so the technology about biomethane, about hydrogen will be very important to see if they will be competitive for us, and also to work on Scope 3. Because Scope 3 also for us it's very important, it's about 50%, yes. And we have to involve the value chain, and we started to speak with our supplier of lime, of ferroalloy, transport, and of course these are the emission more difficult to avoid in the future.
Yes, thank you. And if you mentioned technology, and we have one of the representative of a big technology suppliers in Europe and in the world. I want to take up just very quickly the third chart that I prepared, the third image that I prepared, so that we can talk about it. We mentioned electrification, we mentioned hydrogen, we mentioned renewable energy. If you can put it in the back screen, yes. This is just the calculation that the CEDARWeb research study did. Where we are today, 71% of steel is produced through BF and BOF internationally, which has a 1.9 ton CO2 emission per ton, only 29% EAF scrap. If we fast forward 2050, this is our view for 2.1, 2.6 billion tons of steel that will be produced. Roughly, this could be the percentage. Now, the question for Carlo Piemonte from Primetals is, where are technology partners in this search for green steel? What are they doing, of course, but in particular, also from your point of view, how the decarbonization process is progressing, taking in consideration also what you heard from the steelmaker, and if the time frame also from your point of view, you see a shift in time frame and scenarios and priorities at the moment.
Hi, everybody. I start making a quote from a very nice podcast there's on Radio 3. And it's called Revolution, the World Changes Every Day by Stefano Feltri. Actually, at the beginning of this decarbonization process, the European Union authorities behaved as frontrunners, setting standards that are extremely challenging to be an example for the worldwide steel family. We are progressing, our partners, steel producers, are progressing this direction, but is inevitable due to the changes of the international scenario, both on the strategic and political level, that delays are expected. It's not difficult to understand how the recent developments on Eastern Europe or in the American changed the perspective. The problem is that decarbonization is not something we are doing for tomorrow morning, but requires efforts that must be diluted over decades. Also considering the huge investments this quantum leap change in production routes involve. On the contrary, the priorities of the political and social system are based and targeted or more, let's say, I'm not saying day by day, but medium-term strategies. So at present, we see a shift between what is the long-term priority of the climate change, which is still there. CO2 is still in the air. The problem is still there. and the sensitivity our institutional actors are having about this. Years ago, the motto, the most important thing in all the panels, in all the conferences all around the world was green. To be cool, you have to be green. Whatever you say, green must be there. Today is not like this. First, the paradigm changed to defense, at least here to Europe, and now to tariffs and other things. And this is where our authorities and our policymakers are looking at. From the steel industry point of view, all these factors are extremely important, but they are not helping us going into the good direction for decarbonization. We as Primetals are involved in the large majority of the large decarbonization transition projects here in Europe, mainly in German-speaking countries, Salzgitter, Dillinger, Voestalpine Stahl, and so on. All these projects are going on, are on good track, at least as phase one. Most of these projects has been phased in a first transition with, for example, a first blast electric arc furnace to substitute the first BF they have, and so on. Maybe second or even third step in this transition will be delayed a little bit.
Okay.
But as far as the first steps, they are all in good track. What is the problem? The problem is that you can divide decarbonization projects here in Europe in basically two big families. One are the transition of existing BF-based facilities, basically in Central Europe. And the other one are the, let's call it the startups, the projects that are from scratch, proposing to the market completely new product lines, starting from hydrogen, electric arc furnace, advanced casting and rolling facilities. These two kind of projects have different dynamics. The first one, the large conversion projects, are possible only if there is a huge support by public institutions. We're talking about billions and billions.
You mean financially?
Correct. There's no possibility of big players to, by themselves, face the huge conversion cost this plant has. This is the reason why the country that in Europe is more advanced in this direction is Germany, where the German government put boots on ground, I would say, with billions and billions supporting them. The problem and slowing down of this kind of activities is related to the fact that, as I said, now the political shift is changed. Priorities are a little bit different, unfortunately, to more, let's say, serious stuff coming from other menaces Europe can face. And it's clear that investments, both at governmental level and Commission Europe level, have been set on different priorities. The other family of investments, I mean, let's call it startup projects, Blaster project in Scandinavia, Gravity project in France, Itnum project in Spain, basically are startup approach. They are gathering the money from the financial market. And also in this respect, we have seen that while 3 or 4 years ago, there was a huge appetite from the financial institutions, starting from American pension funds, BigRock, and other big players in the financial stuff, to approach and finance these projects. Now the appetite is being reduced, and we see from our customers that the difficulty to gather the 3, 4, 5 billion euros necessary to start up these plants are not as easy as used to be 3 or 4 years ago.
Yes. So yeah, definitely we talked about the role of the public investment. We talked about the need to decarbonize, maybe delaying some project, but still ongoing in the path. But I would like to ask Mr. Stéphane Tondeau. I mean, Mr. Beltrame made a point, of course. We are in a country that is already partly decarbonized, has a strong longs production, but also flats using EAFs. And when we read the newspaper, as Mr. Piemonte was saying, some countries like Germany are investing a lot of money in the transition. The transition is raising another issue, not only because of the transition in Europe, but the transition globally, which is scrap, which is a big elephant in the room that lies in this Made in Steel conference, is one of the topics that everyone wants to talk about. So the scrap demand and scrap availability to supply. as a big group that has a big majority of the production from blast furnace, how do you prepare for that? The transition to EAF is also part of the ArcelorMittal strategy, but you've looked into, of course, the possibilities that the tension on scrap will increase. Yesterday we had a view on Asia, and India is definitely a country that will increase continuously demand of scrap, whereas China will not, but from the international market will become probably the biggest importer, overtaking Turkey. So how do we get into that, and how do you respond to the concern that Mr. Beltrame definitely raised?
Well, he raised different concerns. Some being on state aid, a bit less on scrap availability. Scrap availability is a real, I think, it's not a concern. It's a market. We'll see how the market solves itself. But we have to look at two things. First thing, indeed, today Europe is net scrap exporter. We export a lot because we don't need all the qualities, and the secondary metallurgy production is covered. But if you look at the roughly 70 to 80 million tons of steel produced by blast furnace, today they use 10% scrap, 8 million ton max. Today, as a first step to decarbonize, all the integrated steel makers using BF are pushing the scrap level, and it may go up to 25%. So it will very naturally, without investments, without big investments, move from 8 to 20 million ton scraps used by the primary route. Meaning the 30 million tons export excedent that we have will already vanish without any major investment. When we will go to DRI with EAFs, which means you can go up to 50% scrap roughly for the flat products, more for the longs, yes. Then if we consider the volume will be the same, 80 million tons, then you may have 30, 40 million tons of scrap for the primary route. Then we will really be in the battle for scrap in Europe. Meaning also that the ones which today consider there is no issue, which are producing with 100% scrap, may have difficulty to feed their EAFs. They may have to have 10% of pig iron or buying DRI, which is today not the case, with also the consequence that the product carbon footprint of their products will increase. So there are a lot of implications of the scrap, and we have not talked yet about the quality. Today, all the scrap finds its market, and mainly in the long products, there are less constraints. But when we will move to the flats using more scrap, there will be more constraints. And here, all the recycling chain needs still to improve. We need new qualities, we need new sorting centers. We are investing a lot on that. We are preparing also all the new metallurgies for all the longs and for the flats, testing that with our customers. But the input quality of the scrap will be key, and that will be really a differentiator between, I think, the winners and the losers in the futures, the ones which are able to source the scrap quality and the quantity they need, and the ones which are not able.
And Mr. Beltrame, from your point of view, how does, I mean, what Tondo explained is the real challenge at the moment, is definitely there. How do you prepare as a company that has for decades used scrap as your main raw material and sees competition increasing year after year? How do you prepare, and how do you make sure that you remain competitive in that field?
Manuel, we agree that Europe probably as a whole is more powerful as a whole. If considered as a continent, is more powerful than the United States and China. What is lacking is braveness. Yes. How is possible that Europe is exporting such an amount of quantity of scrap, and someone is even have so much dareness to say, yes, because it's not consumed in Europe. It's not consumed in Europe. Merchant bar producer, rebar producer are running at 50% of the capacity installed. 50. And now, one day, Turkey, let's put the name, Turkey, wake up and say, look, in the next 2 weeks I drop down the price of $60. And Europe say, yes, if Turkey drop down the price of $60, we have to do it too. We don't understand this. We have to block the export. Stop. I think...
Very straight answer, especially because you mentioned Turkey, which is, of course, our partner on the other side of the Mediterranean. But as I was saying, India will soon become the biggest importer of scrap. So blocking export, I mean, it's not easy. And of course, the recyclers, on the other hand, say this will stop collection, will lower collection.
You know how many countries stop the export of scrap? Practically always.
Yes.
Every country, you see reduction of collection? No. Maybe in Ukraine, but for other reason. You see reduction of collection? No. This is rhetorical. So I don't understand actually where is lying the problem of this argument. We want an industry that have thousands and thousands of employees to be sustainable. We are not sustainable. We are not sustainable because other country has different conditions, not the same level playing field. And if you allow me, I would like also to comment what Carlo was saying before regarding the fact that, if I understand correctly, please correct me otherwise. If we don't, so today the focus is not anymore on green, it's more on protection, and certainly it's true. But I think that this is the solution. You want green, you are not able to create the market, protect your own market. The industry, the entrepreneur, are serious entrepreneurs. We have plenty of very capable and serious entrepreneurs that are not drawing down the money from the company. We are investing all the money that we make into the company. And look at what's happened in the last 20 years in the United States. 20 years ago, United States was I think, technology-wise in the steel industry, the last, or one of the last. Today is super advanced. Why? Protected market, they make the change, they make the switch. They skip from 70% blast furnace into 70% electrical furnace.
Yes.
State aid? No.
So when we talk about protecting the market, there is one topic, of course, that we need to ask ourselves, which is CBAM. I don't know if Mr. Fusato would like to. I know that CBAM is one of the topics that puts everyone in agreement that is something that needs to be reviewed. The question is, how much is this creating a problem also to the steelmakers potentially as the limitation come in January 2026?
CBAM probably will. Europe will need to revise the CBAM rules. Probably it will be necessary to expand the rules for CBAM for finished product and so on. CBAM is a relatively new regulation, so I think we have to start next year. We start with the real effect on the money of CBAM, but it's very important to look at them. For me, it's really complicated as a mechanism. Probably we'll need some simplification and some extension to other products. The real problem, I think, is the market, because we see that we have the best-in-class carbon footprint in our company. In the construction sector, it's every company has the carbon footprint of the product with the APDs, the Environmental Product Declaration. The new APDs of Feralpi are about 300 kilos per ton. Okay, it's a really low level of carbon footprint. But we cannot sell 1 ton more of our steel for this reason. So I agree that it's very important that in the market they start to. I don't even say to have a price premium, but at least ask us which is our carbon footprint, and at least at the same price you have to buy our steel instead of the competitor.
And you think there would need a push from also European Commission or regulation to implement, to force companies, users to use certain percentage of green steel to push this market?
Yes, there is a very huge debate in Europe. What about this green steel? And I think it's a pity because there are many of international regulation that say in a clear way how to calculate the carbon footprint. So it's not a problem. Everybody try to say that his steel is better than the other, but in reality there are international rules and it's quite clear. The problem is that the customer, neither the public customer ask at the moment this, and it's not so complicated. I don't agree when people tell me, "Oh, it's so difficult, it's so complicated." No, it's one number. You have just to see one number in your EPDs
CO2 emission
and
per
CO2
ton.
emission per ton from cradle to gate. If you want, you can add the transport, but in the steel it's not so important. You have to look at one number. In the public investment, in the infrastructure, we start to see something in, for example,
So Mr.
in
Beltrame
France.
was saying they sell around 15%, correct, of Calibra. In Feralpi, you see similar percentage of decarbonized steel or not yet?
In Feralpi, we made a different choice than Beltrame. We decided not to have one line of product green, but we decided to decarbonize all our production. Of course, we don't reach zero. But we have decided to decarbonize all the product in all the plant of Feralpi. But we have a very, very low carbon footprint. I think we've made a market comparison, and we see that our EPDs are about 30-40% lower than the market. But in particular in Italy, but also in Germany, also in Switzerland, also maybe the country little bit more advanced is France. That in public investment in France, we saw some carbon budget and we saw the premium price or the penalties for low carbon footprint. But in Italy, we are selling a lot of millions of tons of steel in the infrastructure public, and nobody asks us one number.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And Mr. Shetty, you were trying to introduce this as well. We have one last slide that I have is actually a number from one of our competitors and partners, Platts. I mean, demand is one problem. There is need for demand for green steel. What is the situation? Your group is investing heavily in supplying green steel. So what is your view on, is the demand actually moving ahead in any ways? And when we see at the premium price is something that was very interesting to talk about maybe in 2023, 2024. But as the numbers go down, it almost seems like, as Mr. Fusato was saying, it's not a matter of premium price. It's a matter of asking us what is our carbon footprint and choosing our product against another rather than paying a premium.
As I see it, currently I don't think the world is in a position to value the green steel because of the current evolving scenario geopolitically. Today's scenario is not the actual prediction of what the premium should be. Because the future of the enterprise, the future color of the enterprise is green, and so is the future color of the steel. So there is no escaping from the fact that decarbonization is going to be imperative for everyone. Now let's take some cases in point. So these premiums are the premiums which the consumers are ready to buy, ready to pay from the steel producers. But actually what we need to look at is as a consumer of a product, any product, what is the premium we are willing to buy, willing to pay? Now let's take a case in point. We are very happy just driving an electric vehicle. But what we do not know is that we feel pride that yes, I am driving an electric vehicle. But do we know that we have already emitted 10 tons of CO2 before we drove the swanky new car out of the showroom? Because each car has already emitted 10 tons in its manufacturing process, up to 14 tons depending on the model. So who is going to account for that? That consciousness has to first come in. And now get into the mathematics. For a 40,000 pound car, the impact of a car which has used green steel is less than 1%, around 0.9%. As the value of the car goes up, because you use roughly a ton of steel per car, so as the value of the car goes up, the percentage impact on the cost of using green steel goes down, and it goes as low as 0.3, 0.2%. Now, unless we are ready to pay that, I don't think we, just by talking about sustainability, would help. Now, let's take the other case in point. You talk of a white good, a washing machine. If you use green steel in the washing machine, the cost impact is less than 20 euros. Now you keep that, at least for the bragging rights, you know, at least to feel good. I don't think you would blink an eye to pay 20 euro more. Now the problem is, I'm sure if you conduct a survey in this room, at least 70% would say yes, we are ready.
Yes.
But the problem is the integration between the end consumer, the producer, the government, and the steel producer. This integration is not yet happened. And these premiums, what we are seeing, is only the market premium. So market doesn't have the clarity yet. But I guess, and there was a survey conducted, I don't remember the survey, but every 2 years, the propensity of a consumer to choose a green product was seen. So way back before 2020, many actually asked, what's a green product? But 2 years later, they said, most of them started saying, yes, we would choose green. And the propensity is actually increasing with every passing year. And the demand for green products is going to be much higher than the current projections.
So you mean the consumer is ahead of the industry, maybe?
Yes, consumer is ahead of the industry, but because it doesn't have options in front of him. If you go to buy a car, you only look at the EV. But if someone tells you, okay, this car has a carbon footprint of 10 tons, and this has a carbon footprint of 5 tons, and this is the premium, that choice has not been given to the consumer.
Yes.
The day you give the choice, I'm sure that all of us, at least 70 to 80% of us, will choose green. And when that happens, I don't think we need to look at the green premiums here. That will be suffice to give us that motivation to go for green. Meanwhile, I think governments have a huge role to play. Of course, regulation is one, but also incentives, tax incentives for the value chain. And as steel producers, at best what we can do is we be in the state of preparedness, make the technology switch, make the fuel switch, or at least start building the necessary infrastructure. I'm sure the day will come when the investments will be bankable and we get the right ROI.
And very quickly, because you have a view from outside of Europe, what is seeing it from outside your view on CBAM, given that you could eventually supply the product without being affected by it? Do you see it as a viable solution because it differentiates the competition, or you also see that it creates problem?
Well, I guess it can be slightly modified in a better manner to cover not only the primary materials, but also the any machinery that, any kind of product that comes in, because carbon footprint should be holistic, not just on a few materials. And I guess for us, we look up to Europe because Europe is the flag bearer and the torch bearer of for the whole world in sustainability. So we highly respect that, and congratulations for being a part of that ecosystem. Because being out of Europe, being in Oman, being in India, we feel that we actually look very much up to Europe, and that's the inspiration for the whole world. And I believe CBAM is a first step. Everything starts with maybe 50% clarity, and I believe clarity will emerge going ahead.
So before moving ahead, I wanted to ask a last question to Mr. Piemonte. We started with Professor Carlo Mapelli on what technology gives us to decarbonize, what is available there. Now the question is, as part of the technology suppliers from Primetals, what can Primetal supply? But also one question is, what does technology has almost ready coming that we don't expect yet? This is always the question that I ask to technology suppliers. Are they closer, for example, to some sort of use of hydrogen, like Mr. Mappelli was saying, closer to new solution that we are not yet expecting, or technology has reached really the peak of the support that it can give to the steel industry? I know it's a difficult one.
I have to clean my crystal ball a little bit for that. No, I mean, I can answer you on two ways. First, as far as the state of the art, today the technology already allows you to produce carbon neutral steel. The most familiar example for everybody is the Arvedi plant, which is, I think, 50 kilometers, 70 kilometers from here. They have been one of the first, if not the first, steelmakers in the world to certify their flat products through the complete supply chain, from raw material down to the finished color-coated, galvanized, whatever product, carbon neutral. And this is possible thanks to a huge investments they made on technology, but also on the sourcing of the raw materials, which is scrap, increased as much as possible, and this is related to the problem of scrap we have already mentioned, making huge investments in the selection of the scrap. This is a trend we see on the market. While in the past steelmakers relied on the scrap they can find on market, now more and more steelmakers are verticalizing their supply chain, including inside of their production scenario, also the scrap processing, because this is becoming crucial, particularly for flat products. The other area where we are investing is in improving the processes, allowing our customers to tolerate worse scrap, which means either worse scrap in terms of copper and other trump elements.
Lower quality scrap.
Precisely. Or increased quantity in terms of percentage. We as Pemetals, we are acting on basically two of these areas. One, for example, is the development, which is a consolidated process of the endless casting and rolling process, that by eliminating all the reheating part between the casting and the rolling, make the plant much more tolerant as far as copper content is concerned. And this, as I said, allows you to be more similar to a long products producer in your needs. The second one, which Carlo Mappelli at the very beginning underlined, is on the raw materials from the minerals. As Carlo said in the beginning, the trend is to rely on DRI-based process using either hydrogen where possible, or at present natural gas. The problem is the reliability not only of the energy related to this process, which is basically power requested to produce hydrogen, but the quality of the iron ore you are using to produce the pellets. And there is limited amount of pellets DRI quality today. So one process that we are working a lot is to develop technologies that allows you to use the low-grade iron ore available that can be used today for the blast furnace route, but to produce pellets that can be used in a DRI green or semi-green, so to say, to produce directly hot metal. In this respect, we are quite ahead. We have already developed a process which is called HYFOR, which is able to process as raw material the same quality you are using for pelletizing plants, using these fines into a fluidized bed system, skipping completely the pelletizing process, and produce fines that can be used either in a smelter or in an electrical furnace-based process to produce hot metal. This allows you to use the low grades you use for blast furnaces, and to completely decarbonize the process, because you can use hydrogen as a reducing element. We made our first pilot plant in Donawitz a couple of years ago, And just 1 month ago, we have signed a contract for the development of the first pilot plant on industrial scale to be installed in Linz, in Voestalpine Stahl. And this is a consortium made by Mitsubishi, made by Vale, supported by the government of Austria. And this will be, I think, ready to be proposed on the market in a couple of years.
Okay.
And we'll have the combination between I4 and smelting technologies to cover completely the production from the ore directly to the liquid metal production. That's, I'm not saying available yet, but this is something we are deeply looking at as a remarkable development for the industry.
And it's one of the new
We look at it in a very, very favorable way, and we think this will, again, open the doors to a massive use of iron ore sources that today are focused only on blast furnace, but will be dedicated also for the production of greener production lines through DRI, gas or hydrogen where available.
So definitely a focus on raw material. I would like to thank all of the panelists this morning. Maybe give them a round of applause for their time. I had so many other questions. We need to talk another time about this. And I would like to invite on the stand, if you want to take your place, for the last presentation, Alexander Julius, who's the new, because he's been elected 4 or 5 months ago, president of Eurometall. And he's going to give us, we asked him actually to close because we always focus on producers, which is fair enough. It's the one that are taking the bigger investments, it's the one that are taking the big risk in decarbonization. But what is the distribution, the entire supply chain doing for decarbonization, and what are the risks also that they're facing because of this transition and costs effectively? Thank you, Alexander.
Yeah, thanks very much. I hope everybody's still awake and can digest actually the last session. Yeah, thank you very much, Zilabab, for the invitation. And again, perhaps to start with, what is Eurometall? And everybody, what was said is rightfully from the steel making side, from the production side. Eurometall is defending and actually comprising the interest of the downstreaming area. That means all the companies who are distributing, processing, trading, and finally servicing the manufacturing industry. And for each and every ton which is produced in steel, it needs to be sold, and it needs to be used by European manufacturing. So what I'm trying to cover a little bit today is what are the challenges that we are facing, and we are facing them now. And in the past 2 days, actually, I discussed with lots of colleagues here what we are facing already in the second half of 2025 going on, which is pretty dramatically changing also the environment and also changing the situation of the supply chain. So why is it so crucial? And that's the key topic actually. We, let's say also from an importation side, that means bringing alternative materials into Europe, we are actually at the front line with new regulations, and those we are facing those regulations, and this means we have to deal with them, and this is then going all along in the supply chain. And when we are talking about the youngest regulations that are coming into force, and CBAM, CSRD, which has been slightly delayed, and ESPR, which is still actually in the design phase, are all concerns that we have to deal with where actually distribution and the supply chain needs to deal with creating a certain transparency or resulting in a more transparency to have a sustainability and also to have the necessary impact that it's being displayed in logistics and transportation and up until the final end user who has to deal with that. So I just wanted to give a quick wrap up, actually where CBAM is coming from, and that is the European ETS scheme. And this was developed in 2005, and it operates actually as a cap and trade principle. That means that a cap is set on emissions, and unused allowances of emissions can then be sold. And this is the first principle, which was designed in 2005, which is giving then also a deadline for 2030, for which then 62% of that, let's say, that caps should be decreased. And this was the basis as a design, where then also other countries came into the picture in the course of the last years, that also non-EU countries participating with their own ETS system, which then gave the basis for CBAM. And to make it a little bit more, well, to rushing a little bit more through that, because this is really one of the key principles. What is the carbon border adjustment mechanism really doing? Is that we see in this graph very clearly that we start in 2025 actually with 0 and the implementation of 2.5% actually 97.5% allowances under CBAM in the importation. And at the same time, we see the interacting of the ETS system. That means that the ETS allowances, that means the allowances that are granted to the emittents in Europe, is going down. So going down until 2034, that means CBAM will reach the peak of 100% by 2034, and at the same time, the allowances will expire. So, which is bringing then to the next question, actually. What is the calculation and what is the implementation? The CBAM price, or let's say that's the CBAM certificate price, is clearly linked to the EU ETS. This, the platform, and this is also the reason why the EU delayed the operational handling of CBAM up to May 2027, because the platform of handling the certificates is not ready. It's simply not ready for trading. So what they are doing now is that in 2027 they will have a platform available, and this platform is handling only CBAM certificates. The price of the certificates is linked to the ETS, to the EU ETS price. And the importers, that means under CBAM, the declarants, they will need to organize, or let's say to buy the certificates on that platform, and can also resell certificates that are not used. The problem with this, and this I'm coming a little bit later about this, is that we don't know at this stage, number one, what will be the ETS value, and this is being declared in 2027 as an average value for 2026 to be taken into consideration. And another factor that I'm coming to a little bit later. We have the two things that were initially not meant to do. That means we have the actual values to be reported, and the Commission also designed now the new system that default values can also be accepted in the future, but those default values, which will have a major impact in the calculation of the certificates to be purchased in the future, will also be decided on with default values to be set in the system. So when we are talking about the different, let's say, responsibilities of the European importer and the non-European steel mill, what needs to be done there? CBAM is designed for declarants. That means actually customs authorized companies, importers, as a declarant status, who are permitted to register also in the platform and in the future to import material and pay on basis of the certificates the CBAM taxes. The annual declarations needs to be done actually for the scope 1 and 2 emissions, and eventually at a later stage also the scope 3 emissions. So that needs to be done by the declarant, who has also a clear responsibility which is shifted with all the responsibilities, and that means also liabilities to the declarant. That means also in case of, let's say, emission values which are not 100% correct, at a later stage, if this is being discovered, the declarant is completely liable for that. The non-European steel mill, on the other side, has to and can register in the future also with the European, on the platform, on the European Commission, actually with their scope 1 and 2 emissions. That is also planned because we cannot, let's say, not every declarant, and we are talking about 100,000 companies most likely to be audited and to be certified, can register independently. So what the scheme is going to be, that we will have a platform where the installations, the non-European mills, can register and make also a declaration on the scope 1 and 2 emissions, and that of course has to be verified by EU verifiers and certification companies. That's the obligation on that side. So I meant already the preconditions of an importer. That means the status of an authorized declarant. And now we are coming to the crucial points, because we have in the past weeks faced a lot of questions coming to, is CBAM going to be postponed? Is it only going to be valid as of 2027? And I think there has been a misunderstanding, because effectively CBAM will be valid as of the 1st of January 2026. But the fiscal implications are only coming in 2027. Basically, it's a cash flow issue, because in 2027, the declarant will have to buy all the certificates for the goods that have been imported in, or let's say fiscally cleared, in 2026. And there are a few unknown factors, and again, it's for the importer, the declarant, then the crucial issue that he has to build reserves. And of course, the next step, it has to be displayed also in the final pricing. So what we see, and I wanted to come actually to one important point which we have discovered also lately with regards to the CBAM scheme, that many people took into consideration that in the first year only 2.5% of the emissions will need to be considered in the pricing, or let's say in the importation, and then actually the fiscal implications. That means the taxed amount, which is unfortunately not quite right. The European Commission has defined a new calculation base, in which they put actually they are putting actually into the calculation a new factor, and this factor can cause, together with the ETS value, that means actually with the certificate value, can cause a major burden, that means a major extra that needs to be paid on top of the material value. So we made also a rough calculation already, but I think that everybody, the obligation of everybody in the supply chain is that to get familiar with the scheme, because it could end up in minimum a higher double-digit extra that has to be added to the price. So what does it mean actually for the supply chain? And that means basically from the importer, when we are talking about imported steels, up until what we formerly said, that it's pretty easy with the Incoterms, where the responsibility and the costs are ending. This, I think, will dramatically change as of next year, effectively already of this year, because everything that is being ordered from non-EU countries and negotiated in the second half of this year and will be fiscally treated on the 1st of January 2026 will be subject to CBAM. And that means to CBAM extras. So what does it mean effectively for us that when we are talking about those regulations, and we're just listing actually a summary of the regulations that we are taking into consideration in the supply chain with this CBAM, which is, the trade measures, that means the safeguard measures in place and all the extras that needs to be taken into consideration. It means that with the unknown factors that we will see today as an importer and making available in the supply chain material, we will need to have a closer relationship to in the supply chain, also with the final buyer. That means with the final manufacturing, companies, because by the end of the day, somebody has to pay the price, and that means when we are facing extras, that means so far unidentified extras in terms of CBAM certificates and the value of CBAM certificates, then we will need to communicate this, because otherwise the intermediates will not be able to digest that. And that's why we see also in the future a much more stronger cooperation within the supply chain between the importing company with a processing company up until the final using company. That means not only with regards to cost, but also in terms of emissions. And that transparency that is being caused by that is of course something which makes a clean identification and a clean transparency and also discussion between the parties unavoidable. When we are talking about, this was quite an interesting subject, when we are talking about extras, emission extras, green steel extras, I think that we will see a little bit different scenario as of next year, because the extra will actually come from higher emission steel being imported. Because when we are, for example, we made let's say, kind of a calculation based on the currently known factors, or let's say on the estimated factors, and we are taking, for example, an emission factor of scope 1 and 2 of 1.8 metric ton emissions into consideration imported, and we are using the calculation of the European Commission, then we may end up in an extra of about taking also the current ETS price of about 68 euros, then we are ending up with an additional of 56 euros per metric ton, which is coming on top of the imported price. So when we are taking this, that means we are using those calculations. It may mean that we don't need to talk about an extra for green steel. Basically, we are talking about extras to be paid for carbon steel, high carbon steels, or let's say carbon steels with a higher emission factor. So that means the world can change. From my perspective, is changing already now, because again, this bill that needs to be taken into consideration will only be paid in 2027. But what needs to be done in the communication from an importation side is that those extras needs to be discussed in the supply chain and needs to be finally built to the final user. So then the question is, and that's why it's extremely important also to make that clear in the supply chain. So far, I don't see anybody who is willing to pay an extra for that, but it is unavoidable that we are coming to the point that the final end user needs to accept that for under CBAM, prices will increase and can increase dramatically. And again, we are only talking about 2.5% in 2025. That means 2026, 2027 forward, onward, will grow the share every year. So that means also, when we are talking now purely from the perspective of the our perspective, actually from the downstream area, we will need in the future much more digitalization, much more cooperation, actually to arrange a smooth supply chain and also make things more transparent, more visible. So I think that some companies have already started doing that in the supply chain, but I think this transparency, which has not been, let's say, which has not been practiced so far with many companies, is really coming more and more necessary. I changed a little bit, I must admit, I changed a little bit the presentation, or let's say what I initially wanted to say today, because what we also discussed here, also with our colleagues from ASSOFERMET, makes it more and more important that the whole supply chain and also the buying companies are becoming familiar with the system that we have to expect, which is in place and which have also a major cost factor, an additional cost factor that has to be taken into consideration. So we don't expect that the European Commission will dramatically change their plans with CBAM. Certainly what we are addressing also, this is one of Eurometal's key perspectives this year, is that the downstream, that means the tariffs on finished or half semi-finished steel-based products, are being increased to a level that the steel products are being also tarified. So that means tariffs like safeguards and also like trade measures, CBAM and trade measures like safeguards have to be copied, have to be mirrored directly to the finished products entering the EU, because this needs to be done to create a level playing field for the European manufacturers to survive in Europe. So this is our key ambition, because if only on the producer side, also on the steel side, those measures are implemented, are being intensified, the manufacturing industry is being pressurized more and more, getting into a sandwich position, and that means there's less space to survive. We see already a disappearing using and also stamping industry in Europe, and this is also being enforced in case there will not be the same measures now happening from the side of the European Commissions on the so-called steel derivatives that we see on the steel products. And for that reason, I can only just emphasize once more, it is very, very important that those information on the actions of CBAM and, let's say, the resulting cost are more and more actually spoken and more also displayed in public, so that by end of this year, latest, we have a clarification in the supply chain what has to be expected and what has to be paid. If this is not the case, we will have a dramatic distortion of trade activities, at least in the first half year of 2026. And this needs to be avoided. In this respect, we are at the moment talking a lot to people like you and to the press to emphasize our position and to emphasize the position of the steel using and processing industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you, everyone and all the speakers for participating. Remember, on the YouTube channel of CIDERWeb, the whole conference will remain both in English and Italian. Thank you very much. We see you after lunch for the last conference of Made in Steel, and thank you for the speakers for their time. Thank you.